Hi everybody, it's Leanne again, back with another video, and this time a dark crystal themed video. This is for my daughter Chloe, who's completely obsessed with the dark crystal, and I thought I'd make something inspired. This mould and the little castle mould and crystal mould are actually from an old Sophie and Toffee box from a previous subscription box that I got, and I thought they would be absolutely perfect for making this trinket box and a pendant for her. This is just an extra resin mould here in case I have too much resin, and I did actually think about using some of the gems in the project, but I ended up not using them at all. The first thing I'm going to do is mix up my epoxy resin the way that I normally do, which is to preheat part A and then mix part B with it, and it helps disperse the bubbles. This crystal mould is actually perfect for the dark crystal, but I did make it a little dark in the end, and I stupidly put the bail on upside down so the crystal hung the wrong way. I didn't realise till I'd finished this video, so if you notice that, just ignore it. I know. I'm just separating some of my resin into a separate bowl here because I'm going to be mixing some colour pigments, and I want several different shades of purple when I'm making this crystal. And this is Mica pigment. The first colour that I'm using here is just a non-branded pigment used for nail art, and I'm applying really fine glitter. Because I wanted all the shades to be similar and not completely different, I actually then separate this colour and add different mica pigment to each one of these so that they're in the same colour family. So I've added pink pigment to that one, a really plum pigment to the second one, and a blue pigment to the third. So they're all going to be in the purple colour family, but they're going to be tinted slightly different. I was going for the look that the crystal in the series has of different shades, but I made these far too opaque. They should have been more transparent if I'm really going for a representation of the crystal in the movie or the series. So I just mix them up on my desk, which has a special plastic cover, and I am randomly just dripping them into the mould. Be warned, if you don't like watching really messy crafts, this video is a lot of mess because I wasn't being very particular or neat that day. So I just keep dripping them in completely randomly, taking little scoops from all three colours and dripping them in until the mould is completely full. If I was going to redo this crystal, then I think I would stick with one sort of transparent shade, put it in there, and then maybe use alcohol inks or something to drip in the other shades. It just was far too opaque for my liking. My daughter still loves it, so I guess you can't really complain when the person it's for thinks it's great. She doesn't even care that it's upside down. Okay, so I've just cleaned up my mould from overspill, give it a little tap and checking that it is completely full, and then putting it aside to cure for 24 hours. With the resin that's left, I'm just going to fill up this little jewel mould. I did originally think I'd use some of these in the trinket box, but I ended up not using them. Instead, they go in my box of resin pieces that I keep for doing mixed media canvases or other resin jewellery pieces where I like to adorn resin with other pieces of resin. Okay, so now I'm on to the castle, and I know this is not a perfect representation of the castle in the series, but it's close enough. And I didn't really want to go to all the bother of sculpting a tiny little castle, so I just went for this. It's going to be black, you're not really going to notice the details once it's inside the trinket box. Now I'm actually using concrete pigment to tint my resin for this piece. I find black is a really hard colour to get in resin paste. Well, it was when I bought this, so concrete powder works really great, and this gives me a really dense black. I love this powder. It was a sample bag and it has lasted me 2 years so far. I'm just spreading it really thinly in the mould just to make sure I get all those tiny crevices and details and corners, pushing it into every tiny gap before I will fill this with the resin. Now the only thing about this powder is it goes everywhere. As you can see on my hand, that was just from touching the bag. It is very pigmented and it leaves your hands filthy afterwards. It also makes the resin a little bit on the thick side, so it is quite hard to drip it in. That's why I'm spreading it absolutely everywhere across the edges of my mould. I do clean it up later on, don't worry. Once it's cured it cleans up no problem, but when it's in powder form like this, it is a bit of a nightmare to use. I guess that's what you get when it's a really good colour payoff. Just cleaned up my mould a little bit and I will put that aside to cure along with the crystal. Okay, on to the trinket box mould, and this is a 2-part mould. This was from Sophie and Toffee. I think it was a Halloween subscription box theme that month. I'm using the same purple that I used for my crystal and putting that in as the first layer of the box. I didn't really have a set plan with this, I just decided it should be purple layers and glitters and just add a little bit of interest to it. So you will see me mixing up many layers of resin. It did take quite a bit of resin to fill this mould, but I think it was worth it in the end. And as you can see, my hands are still filthy from the black pigment. This was after washing them. I added a little clear layer here just to spread out that purple layer that I put in first. I felt like there wasn't enough of it and I wouldn't have been able to colour match it with trying to make the same colour, so adding clear and mixing it just thins out the colour that's already there. This is me mixing up the next layer and I managed to spill glitter everywhere. This was just one of those days where everything I did was either extremely messy or I was really clumsy and I just dropped glitter everywhere. This isn't the first time in this video that I dropped something. Luckily, most of the accidents I have were off camera. So I decided to add a slightly blue layer, just because everything's going to be so purple that once it's layered and you're looking at the side of the box, it will just add a little bit of interest. Plus, I'm planning on putting a design inside the lid of the box that has blue in it, and I just wanted to tie that colour in with the rest of the box. Making up my third layer of resin. I found it really easy to make resin up using these little measuring spoons meant for baking. I have a whole set of different sizes, and depending on how much resin I want to make for a particular piece, I use a corresponding spoon, and I always have the perfect measurement of resin. I use an epoxy resin which is a 50-50 mix, so basically 1 spoon of part A and 1 spoon of part B. This is me finally getting to the very top of that mould, so I move it aside and then do the same on the other half of the mould. The lid side of the mould is a little bit shallower than the actual box side, so I have to make even more resin layers for this part. If I was going to recreate this trinket box again, I would probably mix up a large cup of resin and then separate it, making a range of colours at the same time. It just felt like it was a lot of hassle mixing all these separate little cups of resin, and I got absolutely covered in pigment and in resin, and I just had a bit of a messy workspace and hands when I was done. I went slightly darker on this side of the box just because the lid graduated to a darker colour, so where the lid sits on top of the box I could then go even darker as I worked down the mould. I added some micro marbles to that last layer, and this is me adding a very metallic purple layer just because I'm getting to the bottom of the box and I don't want you to be able to see through. And I think this might be my final layer I'm mixing up now. It's a pretty substantial mould. It has pretty thick sides, so you can imagine that takes a fair bit of resin. And for the last layer I did the trademark purple sparkly that I used in the pendant. Now they've been put aside to dry for the next 24 hours. And look, magic, here we are with them unmoulded. Now I'm sorry it's so shiny, resin was a little bit too shiny for the light I was using. But you do get a better picture of the finished piece at the end where you can see a bit more properly. I'm just sanding down any of the edges that felt like they were sticking out a little. Okay, so as you can see the trinket box fits pretty well together, and now I'm going to work on the lid, which is indented. I think these are meant to be for shaker trinket boxes, you know, when you add the silicone oil. I'm not a big fan of putting oil in things, even if it is completely sealed. So I won't be adding any oil to this project, but I will be taking advantage of that indented lid. I'm using my Arteza paints in the gouache colours. I think I use maybe some of my acrylics, but I tend to go more for the gouache colours. I just prefer that they're matte. You have more working time with them too, because even if they dry you can reactivate them with a little bit of water. So I've put down a piece of clear matting which was left over from when I covered my desk, and I'm using that as a palette. I'm going for a pretty dark palette in general for this piece. The dark crystal always conjures up images of dark scenes and things when I remember it from childhood. Even though I've seen the series, it is a lot brighter. They've remastered the old movie and put that on Netflix too, but generally that's what I think of when I think of the Dark Crystal Castle, is quite a dark scene and sort of muted palette. So that's what I'm going for. I'm just painting pretty much a sky for where my castle is going to sit. I wanted some of the glitter to peek through, so at the very top of the scene I will be leaving the glitter uncovered a little bit, or the paint really thin so that the glitter shines through. I did actually watch the Dark Crystal, the brand new series with Chloe, when it aired on Netflix. We've sat through all 10 episodes, we binge watched them through the October holiday we just had there, where we were all home for an entire week, and we absolutely loved it. But Chloe is completely obsessed, so she asked me to make her something Dark Crystal themed as she started collecting Dark Crystal themed posters and figurines. In fact, she spent her birthday money just recently on 3 of the Funko Pop figures of Rianne, Deet and Hup. I just keep adding paint here until I'm happy with how the sky's starting to look. As it dries it will be slightly lighter. And I find that gouache paint and acrylic paint pretty well onto epoxy resin. I've never had any problems with it, as long as you're sealing the paint after, or like in this case it's going to be completely sealed in inside the trinket box lid and isn't going to be touched. It's absolutely fine to use on resin when creating things like this. just drying that layer so I can get on to the next stage of what I intend to do with this trinket box. Try not to overheat your resin. If you do use a heat tool, resin can get really soft when it's heated and sometimes warp and damage the resin. So just be mindful if you use a heat tool against your resin. Add in a couple of little details on the sky that I felt it lacked. You're not going to see most of this anyway because the castle is going to sit right in the middle of all that. And another little dry. While it's still a little bit wet, I'm just going to sprinkle on some of this off-white, really, I think it's like an AB glitter. It's really shimmery. It gives off different colours when you look at it from side to side. I can't help but have a little sparkle in everything I do. Although my daughter is not a huge fan of glittery things, she doesn't mind when it comes to me making her a little trinket box from the dark crystal. So this is me positioning the castle where I want it to go, trying to decide how high up I want it. Moving everything out of my way while I figure out what I'm doing. Just giving my table a little clean here, so I can start with a nice fresh place to work on the next stage. Now the crystal is also cured, so before I move on to the next stage, I decided to sand down the back of it and attach just a head pin for something for her to hang the pendant on. And this is when I completely forgot that in the series the crystal, the thick bit of the crystal is at the top and the thin tapered bit points down, but because of the way the crystal is made in this resin mould, it was easier just to apply the wire to the thin bit, so the pendant ends up hanging upside down. So I've got everything ready and I decide to get everything out to make my little scene. Mosses and stones and micro marbles and just random little pieces that I think will look good in my little trinket box scene. The whole time I was making this, I was thinking of that picture of the castle sat in front of a really dark sky that you sometimes see when people are posting things about the dark crystal. I didn't really look at any Google images, so I pretty much made this up as I went along, but that was the idea in my head when I started making this. It's that iconic picture of the dark crystal in a really dark sky in a dark terrain. My daughter's a bit of a goth, so I'm sorry, emo I think the word is, and she minds dark colours and dark things, so this is right up her street. Okay, so I've put some stones down at the bottom with some UV resin just to hold them still. Sometimes using UV resin as a glue is as fast as using super glue. Sometimes super glue can react with your resin, especially when you've used something like wash paints over the top, so I opted for UV resin instead of super glue, and now I'm using a non-solvent glue here. This is Unibond. It's not very quick at drying. It is quite strong, but it takes forever to dry. So I'm using that to lay in my sand. I'm using a couple of different types of sand here. The darker sand there is star sand from, I think it was from Sophie and Toffee, or Sweet Little Miniature. I'm using some reindeer moss and some model making fake moss, more assorted stones. I get quite a lot of these supplies from eBay on the model makers part of eBay, people that make train sets and little DIY miniature houses and things. I think they're mostly meant for like scene builders, train set people. You can get really lots of different types of gravel and moss and sands and stones in really small sizes, and they're not that expensive. I think half of what is in this little tray was from a 6-bag set that I bought on eBay from a model making shop, and it came to about £6 for the set of 6 little bags. And I probably have more of what was left in the bags in a box somewhere, because I like to just fill up these little trays so they're handy and I can keep them close by, and then when they run out I top them up. Okay, so I'm just nestled my castle in amongst my moss and adding some really tiny little stones there. I think they might even be crushed shell. And the whole time I'm doing this, I'm sort of checking the position of my castle, moving it around a little bit, gluing things in place. This glue gives you a lot of working time because it takes a little while to cure. So I didn't need to rush in any way. If I wasn't happy with how something was sitting, it's easy to move it around. I'm just really trying to pad out the base where the castle sits, so that instead of it floating on top of it, it actually looks nestled into the scene, and everything that is around it is sort of overlapping it or pushed to the side of it, just trying to make it be one with the scene. I'm adding some little stones and things right at the very base, right at the front. That helps create the illusion that the base is closer to you and the castle is further away. I'm just gluing that is literally almost right up to the top where the plastic is going to be glued. And it's hard to really tell on camera, but it does give a really great 3D effect, this scene. This is where I decided that it maybe needed something sparkly, maybe some shimmer, and I was just trying out different things that might look good in there. And then I remembered my daughter is not one for sparkle and shimmer and gemstones, and she probably wouldn't appreciate me sticking a whole bunch of shiny things in there. I mean, I get away with glitter. I didn't think I would get away with lots of rhinestones. What I did opt for instead was using some nail art metal sequins and gems and things that are a bit more in keeping with the look I was going for in a starry night sky. So I have here a silver metal moon nail charm, and I have some little gold stars and some little hollow gold stars that are also metal. I started by gluing them down with the UV resin, well, the moon anyway, and then decided if I just did a thin layer of UV resin across the whole back, not only would it bring out the glitter in the top of the back, it would also seal the paint and help embed the castle into the scene a little further. It would make it look more settled in the scene. It also helps keep everything in place, that top layer where there's little bits of gravel. So I did a really thin layer of resin, and then I added the stars and things rather than mess around curing little spot areas of resin. It's thin enough that nothing's going to float anyway. So I add these little stars in, and I think my daughter would much prefer these than a bunch of little gemstones. Next thing I do is I just tone down some of these bright colours that are going on in the base here. Like I said, I was going for a really dark sort of gothic scene, like the iconic poster of the dark crystal, where it seems very dark and very sort of sinister. So I toned down some of the colours with a wash of grey metallic paint. Just make everything look dead, basically. As my daughter says, much like her soul. And then I added a little bit of the blue just in there in the odd place, just to tie in the sky to the ground. If it's nighttime, it's maybe casting some sort of shadows and sometimes instead of black, blue looks good as shadows. I added a little bit to the castle so that it would fall into the crevices just to tie the whole scene together, and wiped off the excess with a baby wipe. And just as a last little touch, I then took black acrylic paint just to the very top layer of the stones and the moss, bringing the base of the castle out into its surroundings as though it's casting a heavy black shadow, and it's maybe very settled into its surroundings. Everything close to it is turned black and sinister. And then I decided to take that to my lamp to cure. So while that was curing, I decided to use the UV resin just to adhere the headpin to the back of the crystal, which, as I said earlier, should have been with the hook at the other end, but never mind, she likes it anyway. I just spot cured it with my little torch and then took it to my lamp. Okay, so now my trinket box is out of my UV lamp. I take some black nail varnish, and just in the places where it's upmost towards, well, the moon, I just put some shine on them. The matte black acrylic does great to create the sinister depths, but I wanted some shine to match the castle so that it didn't look too contrasting as it sat in its little scene. And I use it just to add a little detail to some of the boulders, the boulders down the bottom, tripping over my words. And as you can see, the crystal here, I added some purple resin over that head pin, and then I'm just giving it a final varnish with some UV resin. After I actually finished this pendant, I didn't like the effect the UV resin had on the epoxy resin, and I ended up sanding it all back off again. So the crystal you see at the end was probably sanded. I just left my trinket box to dry for a little while just to make sure nothing inside was going to be wet, and then I cut myself a matching shape from some old shop packaging. This is just clear plastic from a toy or something. I drew around the base of the trinket box, cut it out, and now I'm using the UV top coat as my glue to adhere my plastic to my trinket box. The only thing you have to watch when putting plastic on in this manner, if you're not going to fill it with any of the silicone, is to make sure that there are no fingerprints on the inside of your plastic, because once that is sealed in there, you will see them and it's impossible to get rid of them. So I am preheating one part of my resin here because this is going to be a dome top coat just to make this nice and shiny. I don't want many bubbles, and I don't want to take too long with my lighter trying to get rid of bubbles, so I'm preheating my part A of my resin to probably the temperature of a cup of coffee. This is how I was taught to use resin. I've been doing it for the last 10 plus years, so it's a method that works for me and I will continue to do so. I'm adding my part B. I think as well the fact that I live in Scotland, which is generally a cold country for 10 months of the year, maybe 11 months of the year, my resin does tend to get really thick and really full of bubbles because it's so cold. So it's been a method that I've used all along. If you hear any noise in the background, it is actually the night before bonfire night here. In Britain we have something called Guy Fawkes night, which is November the 5th, which is bonfire night. It's pretty much a celebration of Guy Fawkes not blowing up the Houses of Parliament on November the 5th. So yeah, he tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament and failed, and we have celebrated Guy Fawkes night ever since. I think they must have burned him on a big fire, because that's what we do anyway. You make a Guy Fawkes, you put it on a bonfire, you set it alight, and then you set off fireworks and have food and socialise while watching a fireworks display. So if you hear any noises in the background besides my phone pinging, then it will be fireworks. Okay, so I've domed the top of my trinket box here. I'm just checking it comes all the way to the edges. Try not to smear it too far because I don't want it to leak down the sides. And the remainder of the resin that I'd left over, I just put in the base of the trinket box. It's quite a deep trinket box and I wanted to make it a little bit shallower, and it also helps really make the glitter inside that box sparkle a heck of a lot more than it did the way it was. As you can see, it's much sparklier and a sort of more intense colour. So that used up the rest of that resin, and they were left to cure. As you can see, the finished crystal pendant and the trinket box. I still need to buy a hinge for this trinket box, but for now this is the finished piece. My daughter loves it. She was so excited she took it straight up to her bedroom. It's not my kind of thing, but it's definitely hers, and I'm proud of how it turned out. So that's how you make a dark crystal inspired trinket box using Sophie and Toffee moulds. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.